Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. So wanted to check in and see if there were any AEL questions as you're getting rolling on that. I started grading the reflection essays. So far, I've graded like maybe 10 or so, and the ones that I've graded have been outstanding. Really, really great job. So I was really happy to see that. I'll continue grading those over the next few days and just keep posting those in Blackboard as I do those. As I mentioned in the email yesterday, I did post all of your names and your names with the organizations that you've committed to for the semester. So double check to make sure that you're in the right place. And then if you want to coordinate carpooling, transportation stuff, you at least have names of other people who are working with the same organization. I put this section first, and then there's a break, and then the 11 o'clock section right after that. So that's the way that they're listed there. So there might be other people in the other section who are working in the same place that you are too. So that's just something to keep in mind. So are there any questions as far as the AL stuff goes, as far as like communication, logistics, anything as you're getting started with hours and scheduling and all that good stuff? So it's in Blackboard under SL Project Resources. It says like student commitments, I think. Has anybody by chance started hours yet? Where have you started?
Hope.
Okay, cool. And Hope also?
Yeah.
And what are you guys doing there?
We're doing it.
What are you doing there?
Oh, we're serving dinner.
Okay, all right, cool. So I would encourage, if you're in that situation, I would encourage you to try to ramp up the personal interaction as much as possible. So I don't know if they give you the flexibility to like go out and talk to guests as they're eating, or if you kind of have to stay behind and do the work or whatever. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. So. And then Grace, what have you been doing? Sorry, like you're both in that. Yeah, sorry, Grace Taylor. Okay. And at Garden, where are you doing that? Oh, La Casa. Okay, all right, cool, nice. Have you started, Grace?
No, I started today.
Okay, all right. At La Casa. Okay, great. So no questions? All right, so if you still haven't, if you have contacted your organization, still haven't heard back, I would say just kind of keep being insistent and don't be afraid. Don't think that you're nagging them. Just follow up with an email. If you've emailed a couple times and that's still not working, you can loop me in and I can try to help facilitate too. So, okay. Then the other thing moving forward for the discussion board posts, as I said in the email, I want to designate a few of you each time to sort of initiate, to spark the conversation. So if you want to post on the early end of things, you're more than welcome to do it, but I'm asking a few students each time to get their posts in by midnight the night before. So for example, for next Tuesday and Thursday, we're online both days. For Tuesday, I'm asking Eileen and Teresa are the two in this section that I'm asking to post early. So like midnight on Monday night, essentially. And then everybody else is still due by noon on Tuesday. And then for Thursday's class, I think Ava Friedman is the only person in this section and she's not here. So anyway, but I'll do that each online day moving forward. And how it works out with the numbers, it should just be one time that I'm asking you to do that throughout the semester. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about that? I think it's relatively straightforward. So, okay, cool. All right. So let's get rolling into Gandhi. Let me bring this up. Right. So with Gandhi, with each of these figures, we're not spending a ton of time on them, but I want to give you enough substance and enough of a sense of a little bit about their life and kind of the core ideas of what they were all about, and especially as it relates to poverty, the problem with poverty. So with Gandhi today, I'll give you a little bit of background information on Hinduism, and then today's focus will be on nonviolence as a way of life. And then next class, when we're online, what you're looking at is nonviolent resistance. So nonviolence as a way of life means ways that you craft your life, different lifestyle choices that you make, day-to-day sorts of choices that you make that try to foster justice and peace and act against poverty. So it's not a reactive thing, but it's a proactive thing. Whereas what he's probably most famous for is the nonviolent resistance piece, which is you find an injustice, you find some form of oppression in the world, and you're reacting against that, you're resisting that form of violence, that form of injustice. Okay, so that's really, we're holding off on that until next week. So with Gandhi, I do want to let you know that an extra credit opportunity for the section is to watch the film biography of him that was done in the early 1980s. It's a long movie. It's an excellent movie. There is a copy in the library, in our library, if you want to check that out. I believe it also streams on Hulu if you have access to that. So those are the two primary ways that I can think of. I used to have a copy, and I think I can track one down if you want to borrow my copy. I think I have it at home. I don't have it in my office right now, but I just looked for it the other day. So, but you can do that for extra credit. Usually extra credit is going to be embedded within the section. So for example, with Dorothy Day, there's going to be an extra credit thing that's embedded there. There is also a glossary at the back of the book that I turned you on to. So like 400, 401, 401, 402, something like that for terms, because there's going to be a lot of words here that are popping up that we might not be familiar with. As much as possible, what I'm doing, especially today, is highlighting key terms that you want to get comfortable with, that you want to get comfortable using and kind of get familiar with. If it's not one of these key terms, if it's not something on the study guide, don't worry too much about it. Try to figure out from context, use the glossary, ask me, but don't get too worried about the terminology. And then the study guide itself should help you in terms of focusing on different areas in your reading. You have access to the paper prompt also, and so you can take a look at that too. So, okay. So with Gandhi, he's our earliest figure chronologically, and as I mentioned, the first day of class, a huge influence on pretty much everybody else that we're talking about the rest of the semester. He was born in Western India into a merchant caste in the mid-1800s, and during this time, India was under British colonial rule. There was a great deal of oppression of Indians by the British. And so Indians were treated as second-class citizens, were restricted in terms of opportunities and access, and could be subject to police searches and various forms of oppression going on. Around the time that he was your age, he went off to England to study to become a lawyer. And it was actually when he was in England that he started to really engage the sacred scriptures of Hinduism, ironically. He started reading the Bhagavad Gita, which means the song of God. It's not exactly scripture in the sense that if you're familiar with Christianity or Judaism that you would think of in terms of the Bible, but it's regarded, it's highly regarded. And so he became enamored with the Bhagavad Gita, and you'll find references to that in some of the material that you read for today. It's in England that he also started to experiment with vegetarianism and a vegetarian lifestyle. He eventually became a lawyer. He moved to South Africa and practiced law for a number of years, for a couple of decades. In South Africa, there was a large Indian population, and he found that Indians there were being poorly treated, people of color were being poorly treated, and he started his activism there in South Africa in terms of fighting for civil rights. And it's there that he started to experiment with the idea of nonviolent resistance. He eventually comes back to his home country of India in 1915, and he had made a name for himself in South Africa by this point, and there was a burgeoning Indian independence movement. The leaders of the Indian independence movement were aware of Gandhi. When he came back to India, they asked Gandhi to get involved with the independence movement, and he said that he felt like he needed to sort of connect again, to reconnect with his homeland and the people of India. And so he kind of went on this journey into the rural areas and met with people and visited with people and kind of to reacclimate himself. And so it's when he returns from that he sort of transitions into the Gandhi that you have in your head as the activist, as the Indian independence leader, as the advocate for nonviolence and nonviolent resistance. So he's prominent, he's active in the Indian independence movement. That eventually is successful as India gains its independence from Great Britain in 1947. In India, there was, it's majority Hindu, there was a significant Muslim population. And so there was some debate and question and tension over what a new independent India would look like politically and culturally, and how these different religions and ethnicities and everybody would get along. And so Gandhi always advocated for a unified India that would include people of all different ethnicities and religions and whatnot. So he actively sought reconciliation between Hindus and Muslims. It was actually a fellow Hindu who did not agree with that tack and eventually assassinated him in 1948. So very, very shortly after India gains independence, he was assassinated. He becomes this huge cultural figure and sort of this icon of nonviolence and peace and activism after that. And shortly after that is when Martin Luther King, especially, someone who we're looking at in this class, will look to him as an example and as an inspiration. If we start to consider Hinduism as a religion, Hinduism is a tradition that encompasses many different ways of life and many different paths to the truth. And so there's so much diversity within Hinduism that a lot of people will talk about it as Hinduisms, plural, instead of a single, monolithic tradition. So one of the things that Hinduism recognizes is that people are different from each other. We all have different personalities and abilities and strengths and experiences and that sort of thing. And so there's a diversity, a rich diversity and variety within Hinduism, as in all religious traditions, but I would say especially in Hinduism. Despite that diversity and variety, we can still think of common themes and sort of overlapping ideas that many Hindus believe in and practice. And so I want to talk about that as a way to understand Gandhi better. So if we think about claims about who we are as human beings, there's a familiar sort of three-part structure to who we are. So there's the physical aspect, the mental aspect, and then the spiritual. In Hinduism, the soul is referred to as the Atman. It's somewhat dualistic in the sense of that body spirit split that goes on, and yet we'll still find, so there's a sort of prioritization of the soul or the spirit, but we'll still find Gandhi attending to the physical, the material, the physical well-being within the here and now. So it's the Atman that never dies. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of karma. The idea with karma is you reap what you sow. So if you are good, you'll be rewarded. If you're bad, you'll be punished. This is coupled with the belief in reincarnation, or what's referred to as samsara, which is the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. So when we couple those two concepts together, what that means is if you're good in this life, you'll be reborn into a better situation in your next life. If you're bad in this life, you'll be reborn into a worse situation. And that can mean different things to different people. So for some people, that is put in material terms. For some people, that's put in spiritual terms. So if you're a good person and you're striving towards truth and God in this life, then you'll be reborn into a situation where you have even more opportunities and a likelihood to live that life in the next go around. Even if you don't believe in reincarnation, you can still think of your life as a series of moments that you're passing through. And so if you imagine in your own life, think of yourself from 10 years ago. You're not exactly the same person as you were 10 years ago. Your body has changed, your mind has changed, hopefully. But there's an intuitive sense for many of us that there's some constant, enduring presence through all of those changes. And so that would be similar to the idea of the Atman, the soul that passes through successive lives. From a Hindu perspective, if you don't believe in reincarnation, it's simply because you're too close to the moment and to this life, and you lack that sort of distance and detachment and objectivity to see reality for what it really is. So, for example, if you think of a 6-year-old girl with an ice cream cone and the ice cream falls off, what's her reaction going to be? She's going to cry. She's going to be really upset. You're like, hey, we can get you, it's just ice cream. We can get you another ice cream cone. It's not that big of a deal. But she's lost in that moment, so focused on that moment that she can't really step back and see it for what it really is in the grand scheme of things. In a similar way, a Hindu who's coming from this perspective of belief in samsara will say that we're living our life and we're too close to the moment and we don't recognize that it's part of a grander scheme. So we get so wound up in the here and now that we don't recognize the reality that we're living in. If you take a look in the book, if you take a look at page 19, do you guys have copies with you? You should always bring the reading to class. So if you pull that out, if you don't, you can look on with somebody else or make sure that you bring it next time. So I'm looking at section 15, which is called the Brotherhood of Man. The start of the second paragraph there, he says, quote, I want to realize brotherhood or identity, not merely with the beings called human, but I want to realize identity with all life, even with such beings as crawl on earth. I want, if I don't give you a shock, to realize identity with even the crawling things upon earth, because we claim common descent from the same God, and that being so, all life, in whatever form it appears, must be essentially one. So there's a statement there on this idea of reincarnation applying not just to humans, but to all living creatures. And so there's this idea that in a previous life, I might have been in this particular status. In a future life, I might have this status. And so there's this intuitive understanding of the reasonableness, I guess, of nonviolence, that why would you want to hurt another living thing? Okay. So at some point, if we want to start to think about the true meaning of life and what's the purpose of why we're all here, from a Hindu perspective, the goal of existence is to eventually break free from this cycle of life, death, and rebirth, to break out of the cycle of samsara. And that's referred to as liberation or moksha. Even if you're in a good life, even if you're in a good part of the cycle, you kind of want to hit a point where you kind of want to get off the roller coaster and you ask if there's anything beyond this. So from a Hindu perspective, the problem of human existence is ignorance. It's not sin, as you might imagine in a Christian context, but ignorance. And what it is we're ignorant of the true nature of reality and who we really are, our true selves. There are a lot of analogies that are used to describe this. So it would be like a queen who has amnesia and she's wandering around the city thinking that she's a peasant, not really realizing her true self. There are a lot of animal analogies that get used. One that I find helpful is imagine an actress who is playing a role and gets so caught up in that character that she thinks that she is that character rather than recognizing that she's actually an actress playing a role. In a similar way, you're not really who you think you are. You've been duped and you kind of trick yourself into thinking this and you buy into this illusion. And so liberation, the point of existence, is breaking free and detaching from that false sense of self. That's not really who you are. When you do this, as you're able to move away from your false sense of self to your true identity, you're moving closer to God. Okay, so if you want to, if you're interested in this, how do you break free? How do you attain liberation? As I said, Hinduism recognizes that people are different, and so it's not a one-size-fits-all model. It's not a cookie-cutter sort of approach. So there are multiple ways that Hinduism provides for people to come to this realization, this understanding of your true self, of the true nature of reality, and move closer to God. So these ways are called yogas. That's all that yoga means, is a way or a path. There are lots of these, but I can highlight 3 in particular. So again, in Hinduism, if the problem is ignorance, the solution becomes self-realization, enlightenment, and that can be reached through selflessness. So one way, one yoga is referred to as bhakti yoga, which is the way to God through love. So again, with all of these yogas, with all of these ways, the idea here is self-realization through selflessness. This is the most popular path and probably the most similar to Christianity. So here, God is other, and we devote ourselves to God so much that we selflessly we lose ourselves, we move away from that false sense of self and devote ourselves to God. And in that process, we come to understand the true nature of reality. In Hinduism, it's said that there are 330 million gods. Typically, a Hindu doesn't worship that many. Typically, a Hindu will pick a personal deity, one to key in on, because it's easier to have a personal relationship with something, a personified divinity. It's not an abstract God beyond the gods or ultimate reality or something along those lines. So this is the most popular path. It's sort of the least abstract. So you're devoting yourself to a particular God, a particular understanding of God. There's even on a lay level, there's still an understanding that this is that there is a God beyond that God, but it becomes hard to worship that abstraction. So you devote yourself to that God to the point that your ego is sort of diminished and you move closer to God. Okay. The second path is for those who are more intellectually inclined, philosophically. So again, still self-realization through selflessness. Bless you. This is referred to as Jnana Yoga. So this is the shortest, but the steepest path. In Jnana Yoga, it's coming to an understanding that yourself, your Atman, is no different from anyone else's Atman, and there's actually no division between any of us, and there's no division between the self and self with a capital S. There's no difference between, in westernized terms, we would put it in terms of there's no difference between the soul and God. You are God. All is one. In Hindu terms, the Atman, the self, the soul, is identical with Brahman, all that is, ultimate reality, the God beyond God. There are different ways that this is described. One of the more helpful ones to me is imagine an ocean, and you recognize waves, distinctive waves, but those waves don't have an identity that's separate from the ocean. It's all part of one thing. So we think of ourselves as distinct from one another, from ultimate reality, but in fact, in reality, we're not. So we imagine ourselves as 20 separate individuals in the room. This path of Jnana Yoga is saying there's no difference between you and the person next to you. We're all part of one thing, one reality. And so again, nonviolence makes sense. Why would you hurt another person? You're hurting yourself. You're hurting God, essentially. So it's this process of coming to the awareness that you are divine. Not you're in the image of God, not you have a spark of the divine, but you are God, you are divine. So this is based on a very optimistic view of humanity. So we'll keep talking about human nature and different understandings of human nature. You're divine, you're capable of perfection, you only need to realize your true nature, your true identity. If that one doesn't float your boat, if that one kind of hurts your head, Hinduism provides another path. Karma yoga is the one that Gandhi especially is associated with, and what we see manifested in a lot of his writings and a lot of his work. As we keep seeing, it's self-realization through selflessness. And here we're talking about selfless action. So this term, anasakti, to my knowledge, does not appear in anything that I asked you to read, but this is really, really core to Gandhi. So this idea of selfless action. Karma yoga says that you can find God in the everyday world. you don't have to become a monk. You don't have to become a priest. You don't have to become a nun and go out into the wilderness and out into a cave and meditate and pray and come to this profound realization of your true self. Karma yoga holds that you live your life as an ordinary person, but you live it in such a way selflessly that you're giving of others to the point that little ego remains. So it's through service to others that you find the true nature of the self and that you move closer to God. It has kind of a family resemblance to, if you remember last week when we were talking about Parker Palmer's idea of expressive action, you're acting without thought of reward or failure. You're acting because it's something that's flowing out of you naturally. Okay, so there are several passages that we can highlight. I'm just going to point you to two. If you take a look at page 41. So page 41, section 40, the purpose of life. He says, the purpose of life is undoubtedly to know oneself. We cannot do it unless we learn to identify ourselves with all that lives. The sum total of that life is God. Hence the necessity of realizing God living within every one of us. The instrument of this knowledge is boundless, selfless service. And then if you flip to 64, bottom of 64, the last paragraph, he writes, the bearing of this religion on social life is, or has to be, seen in one's daily social contact. To be true to such religion, one has to lose oneself in continuous and continuing service of all life. Realization of truth, with a capital T, and I'll get to that in a second, realization of truth is impossible without a complete merging of oneself in and identification with this limitless ocean of life. Hence for me, there's no escape from social service. There's no happiness on earth, beyond or apart from it. Social service here must be taken to include every department of life. In this scheme, there's nothing low, nothing high. For all is one, though we seem to be many. So this idea of detachment from self, from concern for self, is key. And nonviolence is a type of selfless action then. It's a way to realize your true self, your inner divinity. Okay? A few key terms. So truth with a capital T, or satya, he says truth is God. Linguistically, it would be the same thing as saying God is truth. But the significance here is truth is God. So truth is truth no matter where we find it. So for Gandhi, there's no such thing as Hindu truth and Christian truth and Muslim truth. Truth is truth wherever you find it. So as very typical of Hinduism, Gandhi was extremely open to other religions. And so he engaged, especially Christianity and Islam. And so I gave you a couple of pieces where he's talking about like Jesus and Sermon on the Mount as inspiring for him and as conveying wisdom in his mind. The term that he uses in Hinduism for nonviolence, so this is our focus for today, is ahimsa, no harm. He coined a term, satyagraha, which means nonviolent resistance. So satya, truth, and then sometimes it'll be translated as truth force or God force, soul force. So this is nonviolence applied in response to something. So satyagraha is what he starts to craft in South Africa, and then he carries back with him to India and applies to the British Empire. So we could understand nonviolent resistance as synonymous with civil disobedience, in other words. So for our purposes, I would encourage you to think about Gandhi and nonviolence in three different ways, three sort of levels. One is nonviolence is a way of life. That's what we're going to turn to in just a minute. So nonviolence is a way of life, meaning everything that you do, how you wake up in the morning, what you eat, how you interact with people in your community and your family, what you do for a living, how you move through the day, that's informed by nonviolence. On another level, you've got nonviolence in the form of nonviolent resistance or satyagraha, civil disobedience. This is a way to bring about social or political or cultural change. So it's a reaction to, it's a response to something, an injustice, a form of oppression, or something along those lines. Okay. And then the third level that we're not really spending a lot of time on, but I just wanted to mention, is Gandhi's what he called his constructive program, which was his vision for what society could look like and should look like long term. After the British are gone, how should education be framed? How should, what economic systems, what political systems, what would this all look like if we're functioning non-violently? Do we need a police force, for example? What does that look like? So those sorts of questions. How are goods and services distributed fairly and equitably? He's attending to that in the constructive program. But again, nonviolence is informing that. So it's sort of nonviolence on an individual level, and then it's sort of broadening circles in a sense. In another sense, though, what we do as individuals on a personal level is also always part of a community and part of a larger picture. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Gandhi in general? No? Okay. So where I want to move now is to nonviolence as a way of life. And I want to tap into the readings and think about particular examples that we can imagine in terms of what this would look like. How would this inform a day-to-day life? Okay. So let me bring this up. So we're gonna focus, like I said, that idea of anasakti is gonna run through everything that we can think of here. So if we're thinking of nonviolence as a way of life, it probably goes without saying that we're gonna restrict ourselves from physical violence, right? So you're not gonna punch the person next to you, okay? So no physical violence. Nonviolence frequently is thought of as, what am I not doing? And so you want to turn that around in your head and don't just think of it in terms of, it's not just don't do harm, but how do you promote love, peace, justice? This is a proactive sort of approach, okay? So again, if violence is not framed simply in terms of physical violence, then we might understand poverty or different forms of injustice as violence. And so nonviolence could be any way that we're fostering justice, that we're moving against injustice. If nonviolence doesn't just mean physical nonviolence, in other words, if that makes sense. So what is an example of living nonviolently that you saw going on in the material for today? Yeah, I think.
On page 78, 86, voluntary poverty. I just thought it was interesting when he was talking about his experience, where he said, "I cannot tell you with truth that when this belief came to me, I discarded everything believing. Let's confess to you that progress at first was slow, and now to recall the days of struggle, I remember that it was so painful in the beginning. But as days went by, I saw that I had to throw overboard many other things which I used to consider as mine. And the time came when it became a matter of how we were going to give up those things." I just thought it was interesting because in the way he's acting on that selfless action.
Awesome, perfect. What page are you on?
78.
Okay. So there's that whole section on voluntary poverty, right? So we can say a lot more about voluntary poverty in terms of the philosophy of it. What does that actually look like? How is that related to the Hindu context and whatnot? So there's much more to be said about that, but that's an excellent starting point. We can delve more into voluntary poverty if you want. We can go in a different direction, come back to that. What else do you see going on? Yep.
On page 86, talks about, like in the bottom paragraph, about materialism. It says, so far we've made the modern materialism, for example, the poor are going downhill progress. I feel that economic progress, in the sense I put, is in an agnostic to real profits, but has been so it's just like prioritizing like what we like not promoting like nonviolence.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So I think it's hard to move into this idea mentally because I tend to get caught up in thinking of violence in physical terms, and nonviolence is like withholding physical violence. But again, if we think of something like injustice or poverty as a form of violence, then voluntary poverty becomes a form of nonviolence because you're not contributing to poverty and you're in fact addressing those sorts of injustices. Right? Does that make sense? So we can say a lot more still on voluntary poverty. There's another term that he uses to describe it. We can add to that, or if you see something else, there are probably like, I don't know, a half dozen different features that we could unpack. So there are other directions to go in. Here's.
I just thought it was interesting, like coming from his world to like background, like studying, like I don't know, the way that he chose about it, like to choose to go about it. And you believe in reincarnation, and you're gonna come back. This goal is to break out, like finally achieve peace. And it's interesting, like how he. I don't know his motivations for it. Cause like, is his motivation for? I don't think his motivation for like serving people is rooted in like trying to break free from this. It's like rooted in like a deep sense of like passion. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Do you? Yeah.
like the point is like trying to break out of like this. You just have to suffer through this life, you know what I mean? Figure out how to break out of what the real sins are and then get out. You know what I mean? Why would you focus on like making your conditions better? But like there's that compassion aspect of it as well. Like,
Yeah, those are really, really good insights. I think there are times when Gandhi and the Hindu tradition in general can be understood very dualistically as prioritizing the spiritual and the soul and that idea of liberation at the expense of the body, the material well-being, this life, where it seems to diminish the importance of this life in a sense. And I think that on another level, what I was hearing you ask about, which I think is a great question, is if I am trying to attain moksha, if I'm trying to break out of the cycle of reincarnation, and I'm saying I'm doing this through selflessness, what is my motivation? It seems like it is selfish because I'm wanting to break out of the cycle. And so it seems duplicitous, I don't know, hypocritical, something to try to approach that through selflessness. Then is that kind of what I was hearing? Yeah. So I think those are kind of inherent tensions. I think you're reading Gandhi accurately and generously in terms of saying like it's, and I think for most Hindus, it's like, yeah, to some extent, there's a selfish motivation. There's a self-interest in this, and yet that's sort of on the back burner. What's really driving it is my love for others and my concern for others. But yeah, those are both excellent insights and questions. So, did you want to say more?
Yeah, I wasn't like saying that I was.
Yeah.
Because like I mean like there's that motivation with Christianity as well. You know, like, you know, I mean, or going to help.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's absolutely true. Yeah. Yeah. Grace.
Kind of on that. On page 91, it says if restraining possession only if what's needed, no one would being blunt or well contentment. And like coming from a perspective or a Christian perspective, like that's like really easy to say if you're coming from a religious background, but if you're telling people who are poor who don't have a religious background that this is how they should be living, like they're like, well, I don't have to do anything. So
Yeah.
like it might not seem like it's like kind, like form of help, or like he's passing on knowledge. Since their basic needs aren't being met, you can't use that space.
Yeah. The issue of voluntary poverty, and I think this will flare up again when we get to Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement, who are also going to advocate for voluntary poverty. Sometimes it can be a critique of, well, you have to be coming from a certain social or economic status to make the claim that we should give up our stuff and not be as materialistic. Like, what do you say to somebody who's poor, who's involuntarily poor, who's already hungry and doesn't have basic needs? It's like, why would I, like, how am I don't fit in this. And I think especially I could say with Day and the Catholic worker, that there's a distinction that's made between involuntary poverty and voluntary poverty. So this is a way of life. Like, yes, it could be applied to everyone, but I think the intended target is especially like middle class and upper class, like in terms of socioeconomic terms. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I think also tying the idea of truth into this voluntary poverty. If we look at page 80, talking about the idea of like having possessions, but let me find the quote again. People are deceiving themselves and their neighbors also by saying, in the spirit I have given up all possessions, and yet externally I possess these things. You must not examine my deed, you must examine my intention, and of my intention only I must remain the sole witness. And I think that like they further down the page, they talk about the remedy being like, if you must possess these things, you must hold them at the disposal of those who want them. So I think the idea, especially in Western culture, like not even from a religious standpoint, but in Western culture, we are very much fueled by consumerism and the idea of that if you have things in life, that means you've made it, because you run like on an economy that promotes materialism, and like you have to have the best of the things to prove that you are in good standing. And so I think the idea of being ready to give up those things at any time is absolutely like wild, but we also see people do it. I was talking to Pastor Carrie this morning, and she had sent out a message because one of the babies at For the Good was malnourished and like wasn't able to get enough milk, and she messaged everyone she could who thought might have breast milk and was able to collect over 300 ounces of milk. And so to be looking for like just even basic necessities like that, because they are people who don't have a lot, and still giving and being ready to give up everything that you have. Like, I think it's interesting that you can see it if you look for it, but otherwise as a society, like that's not something we're promoting at all.
Yeah, no, I think there are a lot of good points there that you're making. If go to pages 91 and 92, the section on non-possession. So another way that he's referring to voluntary poverty is non-possession. So I would say like this whole section is worthwhile to reread at some point. So second sentence in, he says, a thing not originally stolen must nevertheless be classified as stolen property if we possess it without needing it. Possession implies provision for the future. If you go further down the page, maybe, I don't know, 6 lines up from the bottom of the page, he says, if each retained possession only of what he needed, no one would be in want and all would live in contentment. So there's plenty to go around. We just don't do a good job of sharing it. As it is, the rich are discontented no less than the poor. The poor man would fain become a millionaire and the millionaire a multimillionaire. So no matter what your lot in life, you always want more. Okay. The poor are not content if they get their daily needs. And here's the difference, though. He says they have a right, however, to get enough for their daily needs. And it's the duty of society to help them satisfy them. So kind of going back to some of the earlier comments, there is still a sense of, yes, Gandhi and Hinduism are very spiritual and they can fall into this dualistic sort of sentiment of this world doesn't really matter, but you still have the claim here of saying people deserve to eat, to have basic material needs met. They have a right to have these met, and it's the duty of society to help them satisfy them. And then start of the next paragraph on 92 is what I would really key in on. He says, perfect fulfillment of the ideal of non-possession requires that man should, like the birds, have no roof over his head, no clothing, and no stock of food for the morrow. He will indeed need his daily bread, but it will be God's business and not his to provide it. So is Gandhi saying that you should go and get rid of all of your possessions, get rid of all of your clothes, get rid of all of your food, don't worry about lunch, don't worry about any of that sort of thing? Is that what he's saying here? I'm getting a few no head nods. I would say he is saying that. That's the radical challenge that he's giving us. He's saying, like, do not think about lunch. God will provide it. It's an ideal. It's a real ideal that we should strive toward. So if we keep going, he says, only very, very few, if any at all, can reach this ideal. We ordinary seekers, and he's coupling himself in this, right? He's grouping himself in this. So his autobiography was subtitled Experiments with the Truth. He saw his whole life as an experiment. He's trying these different things, and if they don't work, then he tries a different route. Okay, so it's not this sort of doctrinaire approach. We ordinary seekers may not be repelled by the seeming impossibility, but we must keep the ideal constantly before us, and in the light thereof, critically examine our possessions and try to reduce them. Civilization, in the real sense of the term, consists not in the multiplication, but in the deliberate and voluntary reduction of wants. And why? This is the kicker. This alone promotes real happiness and contentment and increases the capacity for service. If you are constantly worried about your possessions and your material well-being, and you need to go to college because you need to get a job, because you need to get food, because you need to provide for family, you get so caught up in that mindset that you're really only thinking about the self. And so what non-possession means is if you critically examine your material possessions and you try to reduce them, what you'll find is that you're not constantly seeking for the next thing. You don't need the newest model of this. You don't need the updated version of this. You don't need a new whatever. You don't need another article of clothing. And when you can take a step back from that, what you start to do is you realize you have time and energy to pay attention to other people. And so it's redirected towards service for others. Service to others, in others is where you find God. Okay, so that's why non-possession is a really, really key aspect of nonviolence as a way of life. Again, it's selflessness, it's selfless action that's driving it. Teresa?
I mean, like, he idolizes this asceticism, and why fight against, like, societal oppression? Why not just cope and, focus on, like, cheating on, you know what I mean? I find that, like, there's, like, a big tension, I don't know, between him wanting good things for poor people, but also saying that, like, this ultimately will not fulfill you spiritually. But like another thing within Hinduism, like you have to adhere to the caste system, even though there's like an inherent like you know, you say that's a form of oppression, like structure. Like why is it that some people are on the bottom versus some people are on the top? Why aren't you fighting against that too?
Mhm.
I guess one thing at a time.
Yeah. So the first idea, I think, primarily Gandhi's talking to everybody, the poor included, but I think the brunt of it is especially on people who have more than what they really need. And so I think that's the focus, and that's how I would take him. I don't know if that addresses the first point you were making.
I guess you're right. Like intended audience matters and ridiculous.
I mean, someone who has nothing. I don't ultimately on a spiritual level. If you have 3 cents, he is saying, give that away. And what does your life look like? In a more practical way, though, he's saying the person who has 3 cents doesn't have enough for lunch. It's my job as someone who has more than 3 cents to critically examine my material possessions and provide for. It's the duty of society to provide for. So I think you're onto something there, but I wouldn't take it too far. He was against untouchability. Did anybody pick up on that in the reading? That's another thing that we could add to the list. There's kind of a mention of this where there's a mention on 65 of God being found among the least of society. So in brief, you're making reference to the caste system. So the caste system in India says that there are different socioeconomic classes. This is the will of God. This is the way it's supposed to be. And so there's a merchant class, and there's a priest class, and there's a worker class, and so there's sort of these divisions, and there's this social hierarchy of the caste system. Interestingly enough, and we can critique him on this, Gandhi never particularly critiqued the caste system per se, but there's a category of people that were lower, that were thought of as lower, that weren't even on the ladder in the caste system, and those were referred to as untouchables. So what he did advocate for was the rights and the well-being of the untouchables, and he didn't use that term. Actually, he referred to them as Harijan, or children of God, and actually called one of his journals Harijan. So the least of the least is what he's advocating for there. What about in terms of things like food, clothing? What would nonviolence look like? What do you think Gandhi's eating? Or what is he not eating? Would be a really straightforward way of doing this. Yeah. Meat. Why not eat meat? Why'd you say that? Yeah, all living things are part of the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. So it would go against that philosophy. If I'm eating another living thing, I shouldn't be eating another living animal, right? So veganism, ideally, vegetarianism. So there's also though, okay, so all right, Gandhi, I'm gonna be a vegetarian, so I'm gonna go to the salad bar and pig out. I'm gonna eat I'm gonna eat everything that's there. What else would be a guiding principle in terms of what we eat? What would other ideas be? Maybe?
I mean, only eating enough to sustain yourself and fulfill your needs. However, follow-up question.
Yes.
Point on like being vegetarian, vegan. And maybe this is too meta of a thought, but like to not take away from others because animals are seen as also living beings, would you then not be able to eat anything that would then be used as animal feed?
So there's at one point, I don't think I I don't think I gave it to you, but at one point there's an interviewer who's like, all right, all living creatures, how far do we want to push this, Gandhi? So mammals, sure. Other animals, sure. When you breathe, you're breathing in microbes. You're killing microbes, aren't you? When you walk across the floor, you're stepping on microbes. So it seems like you're a hypocrite, Gandhi. And he's basically saying like, oh, okay, let's not get too carried away here. So there's this principle with Gandhi of there's a great deal of reasonableness and pragmatism, I guess is how I would put it. And there's this sentiment of like, try your best. Just because I can't live up to that ideal doesn't mean, oh, the heck with it, I'm not going to do any of it. So I think that's something that's important to remember with all of these ideas. So if we back up to non-possession, if that, like, okay, we live in it's a beautiful day out today, but we live in a cold climate. Am I really going to give away my coat and all my, like, that sort of thing? Okay, maybe not, but I probably have like 3 coats. Do I need 3 coats? Right. So I can be dismissive of the idea and say, well, I need this stuff for warmth and stuff. I have material needs too. So at the end of the day, I'm just going to kind of dismiss Gandhi and not do any of this. There's a path there. There's sort of this middle ground of, wait a second, this can inform and I can do this by degrees to a certain extent. And we can say the same thing in terms of the food and clothing in general. So what would other principles be in terms of eating? What we're eating. So not overindulging, that would be important, right? Because if I'm eating more than what I really need, I'm effectively taking from other people, contributing to poverty, contributing to these other problems. What else is he advocating for? Where ideally, where are you getting the food that you're eating? How are you getting the food that you're eating? Yeah. Okay.
Like, not eating food that's out of season. Like, other countries are imported.
Yeah, good. So we've got this idea in places, he'll talk about it in terms of self-reliance, but not in like a sense of rugged individualism. But Swadeshi means the use of local things. So what he advocated for was ideally growing your own food. You're growing your own food, you're feeding yourself. And again, it's not just sort of in this little pod, I'm living off the grid and I'm just taking care of myself. But the vision is communal farms, where you've got different people growing different stuff and then an exchange of goods. So Swadeshi refers to the use of local things. So you've got communal farms where some people are growing this product, other people are growing this product, and then you barter and then you trade and stuff, and so you're meeting your needs along those lines. So it's stuff that's locally grown, it's stuff that's humanely processed. Speaking especially in terms of the food, it might be, going to a farmer's market, buying organic stuff, something along those lines. Again, not overindulging. So even if I want that cheeseburger, where's the beef coming from, right? I need to be mindful and ask that sort of a question. If I'm going to indulge, if I'm going to eat meat, there's still a better way to do it, a humane and ethical way to do it. Clothing, same thing. He has this vision of everyone making their own clothing, homespun clothing that he referred to as khadi. If I'm making my own clothing, where am I not buying from? If you're making your own clothes, where are you not getting the clothes from? Yeah, corporations, right? So a lot of this starts to blend into nonviolent resistance. This becomes a way to attack capitalism. This becomes a way to attack the British manufacturers and the British Empire more broadly. You've got this ideal of, I would say, manual physical labor. That's emphasized. Again, this is sort of a leveling effect that it can have. There's something dignifying and beautiful about physical labor and manual labor, growing your own food. He says if everyone in the Indian Congress does this, that starts to get at the point of people living in solidarity with one another and empathy with one another and this sort of thing. So people can really be in each other's shoes and understand where you're coming from. It's not just the poorest of the poor who are responsible for growing my food. So it's sort of this leveling effect also. There's a lot of anti-machinery, anti-industrialization stuff that comes up. It kind of goes along with the idea of the materialism piece that was mentioned earlier. Yeah, Ava?
Is this where we see things like time-based economies and time dollars come into place?
What is that? What do you mean by that?
So there are some like community economies where they basically are like, okay, we're not feeding into like materialism and like the buying of mass things, but they will like, they believe that everybody has a skill and a particular skill set. So one person will like farm the food and they will exchange the food for the clothes that somebody else produces. And like you basically are serving your time and everything equates in like a time dollar. So you have an exchange of your time that went into the food is exchangeable for the time that went into that piece of clothing.
Yes, I haven't heard of it. I haven't heard of that and put in terms of time, but that's what you described is exactly what Gandhi's talking about, and exactly what we'll see with the Catholic worker ideal of their communal farms also. So the co-founder of the Catholic Worker, Peter Morin, will talk about it in terms of like an exchange of gifts, not in terms of time. But it's this idea. He'll be critical of the idea that you work to make money to then use the money to buy goods. It's you work to produce the good, and then you exchange the good. So it sounds exactly like it. It's probably
specifically just because you can also learn the skill. So if you take the time to learn the skill, you then put time towards it. That's
exactly the Catholic worker model. It's probably a contemporary version of it that I'm not familiar with. So, but yeah. Okay. So do we start to get a sense? So if we back up and kind of zoom back out, when we think of Gandhi and we think of nonviolence, usually our mind goes directly to nonviolent resistance. But there's a lot more going on in terms of, and again, this idea of selfless action that courses through all of these pieces, right? That's really, really critical. So that's guiding these actions and these ideas in the sense that I'm operating selflessly out of concern for the other. I'm coming to a true understanding of myself in relation to others, and by that process, I'm coming to a true understanding of my relationship with God. Okay. So as we transition moving forward, then we'll focus on, all right, the British are the bad guys. We've got these forms of oppression and injustice. How do I apply some of these principles and some of these ideas in that context to that reality? And that's where nonviolent resistance or satyagraha grows up. Okay? All right. So the last thing that I wanted you guys to do today is a little thought exercise. So if you are guided by, especially this idea of non-possession, what would this look like in your own life? How could you affect non-possession and voluntary poverty in your own life in the short term? So I want you to take a few minutes, jot down some ideas. So what would it entail? Specifically, what would you do? What could you do? And then these follow-up questions of, if you're imagining that, what difference does it make? Is essentially what these other questions are asking about. So what impact, how does this impact your life, your sense of self and others? Challenges, in what ways might this be beneficial? Okay, so take a couple minutes and think about this. What would living non-violently look like in your day-to-day life? Question? Grace, would you come up with? What did you say?
For, I'm writing down the question, but I think for like why would this be really beneficial, I guess, for me, is I said that it would bring more purpose to like my life, and like knowing that I'm like helping other people, it's really valuable for me. I said one thing I could do is like if any of my friends need help with homework or something, or like help tutor someone else or something like that, or trying to make like a meal myself instead of like going to the dining hall or something else like that. It's like a way of trying to promote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, so the dining hall shows another whole interesting wrinkle in all of this, right? So, okay, yeah. What's something else that you guys came up with? Yeah. So,
I think my main problem personally is like I use shopping as like kind of like therapy.
Yeah.
And I'm really bad at how to spend money. And I just said that donating things, because I like to also hold on to things that have like sentimental value and like stuff I don't use anymore. And I think like donating would be a really good thing that I could do. And maybe just like asking my friends if they need stuff that I don't use anymore.
okay, yeah, good. Yeah.
Kind of similar to the dining hall. I love like a treat for myself is like I look forward to getting like a fun drink, whether like Starbucks or whatever, and I feel like I just pour money into that. And so I definitely think like cutting that out and like eliminating.
Yeah, good. What else? Yeah.
Another thing you could do is like I guess like volunteering more of your time up to people who like need it more, I guess, in like a way. So like I know there's like clubs at Notre where like they go and they'll like drive you to like places where you can volunteer and help other people.
Yeah, good, good. Madeline, Bella, what did you come up with?
I said pretty much the same thing as Bella. That I shop like pretty much every day, so that would be really hard to pick up. But she said I could donate all my stuff because I own like a lot of stuff that I don't like necessarily need.
Yeah.
So I can give it to people who like need it more than I.
So I think those are really good ideas. So if we're thinking in terms of like straightforward material possessions, it's really interesting how I don't know if you realize that you were saying it, but you said it in terms of all of my stuff. I could donate all of my stuff, or I should like it doesn't. So I think that it's really, really critical with Gandhi, and maybe this is just like my way of rationalizing my lifestyle or whatever, but I don't think it always has to go to the like the absolute extreme. It's kind of like, okay, if I shop every day, maybe I only shop 5 days this week instead of 7. I don't have to give up everything. 2% of what I have, 10% of what I have, right? Like I don't have to not get a special drink every day, but maybe when I do, I also do this to counterbalance it, or I sacrifice. So it's the idea of again, it's selfless action. If I just kind of pause and I'm not just thinking about what brings me joy, what do I want in this moment, but kind of how can I spin this externally? I think that's really, really critical. So there are ways to do this in small pieces. And the idea, I think, is that the more you do this, the more you want to do this. So there's a benefit to the self. There's also a benefit more broadly to society, I think, even in small ways. But it should be like a snowball effect. So even if it starts small, maybe it picks up from that. There's also criticisms when we think about nonviolent resistance with Gandhi of, well, I don't see everybody doing this. There's obviously a lot of violence in the world. And so I just throw up my hands and I'm like, nope, the world's just a bad place. There's nothing I can do about it. But the ways that I can contribute positively, even in small ways, that's the way to read Gandhi. And then if you start to move in that direction, then it can kind of escalate from there, and amplify from there. Right. So, all right. So we'll stop for today. We'll move into nonviolent resistance. We're online on Tuesday, so let me know if you have any questions. I'll keep grading the reflection essays. Let me know if you want more feedback than what I'm giving you on those too. So, okay. So have a good weekend. Leave your name cards with me before you head out. And good luck with the start of your hours if you're getting going with your service learning.